the next half hour, slightly more, slightly less, we will see how long it will take. We will be talking indeed about research that was conducted in work package 6 of the Norm project, which focuses on, well, social science and humanities research regarding radon and norm. And more particularly, we will actually be focusing on research that we have conducted on, well, radon in the context of health spas, and particularly how this radon is actually being presented by these health spas, how it is being perceived by different stakeholder groups, and how it is being enacted. Because, well, as most of you might know, within Europe, and you see it here on the map, indicated in which countries actually, you can find various facilities that offer treatments, therapies, services, which claim beneficial effects for the health of radon exposure. In many cases, these facilities, which we provide here with a generic term of radon spas, but they include also, in our understanding at least, for example, former mining tunnels in which people inhale radon-rich air, also, well, facilities with bathing facilities or swimming facilities. So it's a bit of a generic term. But these radon spas, they very often have established histories and positions, meaning that they sometimes already exist for more than 100 years. For example, if you look at Czech Republic, and have also sometimes, well, insurance coverage provided in different European countries. So for many of you, this might not be that surprising, but if you come from a country like I do, from Belgium, in which you don't have these kind of facilities, it is maybe a bit of a, well, strange or maybe surprising issue to learn about, because in a health context, and particularly in radiation protection, we are used to think about radon as something that you don't want to expose yourself to, obviously, as something which is a threat to you, which is a carcinogenic, a known carcinogenic that might actually cause lung cancer, among other potential, well, detrimental health effects. So we were quite intrigued by this existence of these therapy centers or these radon facilities, radon spa facilities that are actually offering treatments based on radon. And what we particularly want to investigate here then is this seeming paradox between, at the one hand, radon as a treatment, as you can encounter them in these radon spas, and radon as a threat, the way in which, at least in radiation protection, we are used to think about radon as something that you need to protect yourself from. We have a threefold focus, and we will zoom in this presentation on, well, how we tackle these three different topics and the results that we obtained one by one, but here just as an overview. Well, first of all, as a subtopic, we were interested in how is radon actually being communicated about or presented by radon spas to the general public, and particularly zooming in on the websites that these spas are using to, well, basically publish their services to the outside world. Second, we were interested in how radon is actually being perceived and enacted by particular stakeholder groups. First and foremost, we were looking at how are actually the people working at and owning and managing these radon spas, how they are actually looking at the facilities that they're operating and the role of radon within these facilities. And second, we were interested in how radon experts, radon authorities, health authorities, how they're actually looking at the presence of radon and radon spas in the countries in which they are working. And then thirdly, we are interested in how radon is actually being, well, perceived in the context of radon spas by the general public in different European countries. So for each of these, we will now zoom in on what we have done to kind of find out more about these topics and the results that we have obtained. But before delving into these topics, maybe two important disclaimers. First of all, what we are presenting here is, well, you could call it the first of a kind study, at least at the European level. So we were actually quite intrigued when starting the work that we are doing or have been doing in this task with the literature review, that there is actually no existing literature on these radon spas in Europe from a social science and humanities perspective. So these questions on communicating about radon and radon spas and how it is being perceived by different stakeholder groups, they have not been engaged with before, at least not in the European context. We have found one author from the United States who has been working a bit on this from the perspective of people visiting a health spa in the US. But that's more than 20 years ago. So in that sense, it's really kind of a first of a kind study that we're presenting here, which also has its value because of being, well, this kind of exploratory in nature study. And second, and maybe more important as a disclaimer, it is not, and it has never been our objective to actually assess radon concentrations, doses, or health effects within the context of radon spas. So we do not consider it to be our interest nor our expertise as social scientists to make any kind of claims on how high are the radon concentrations actually within the spas that we investigated, what doses are people actually exposing themselves to, and whether or not this does have beneficial or detrimental health effects in these radon spas. You will also see that we are considering a radon spa as a facility which basically presents itself as using radon in any kind of treatment or service that they're offering. We are not looking at, well, what are actually the radon concentrations within these spas. We know that in different countries there is legislation based on, well, how much radon should be there for a radon spa to actually be considered as a radon spa. But this was not our prime interest. For us, it was really kind of their self-identification as a spa or facility which is using radon in its services or in its treatments. So these are the two important disclaimers that we want to stress. Yeah. So then zooming in on the first, well, research question that we had, how is radon actually being communicated about on the websites of such radon spas in Europe? There we started, well, first of all, to identify radon spas across the EU. We started to look with specific keywords, well, what spas do we actually find? And then to kind of see how is radon actually being presented or framed on the websites of these spas. Framing is, well, a social scientific concept, which basically is mostly used in communication studies to kind of highlight that in any communication, we tend to emphasize certain aspects of a reality that we want to communicate about, or maybe downplay or even ignore some aspects of this reality. So by the way in which we communicate, we are actually creating a certain reality that we are communicating about. To give maybe a very simplistic example related to well, current events, if you would look at the way in which maybe Fox News is covering the US elections and its outcomes versus how CNN or European media are covering the US elections. They are both talking about the same event, the US elections, but depending on which news outlet or which communication you get, your view on what the outcome is and whether it's good or not good might be entirely different because they are highlighting and emphasizing different aspects, maybe downplaying or minimizing others. And that's exactly what we also aim to do with these radon spas. We try to look at, well, what specific characteristics of radon are these spas actually emphasizing, highlighting, putting forward, maybe what are they not saying. Because we know from other studies that actually the way in which you frame might also entail different reactions from the people that you are actually directing this framing to. So people visiting the websites of these radon spas might get other reactions to what radon is than those who would read, for example, a leaflet of a health authority, which is warning you to take action on radon in your house or in your workplace. So concretely, as I said, we started by just, well, identifying the websites of radon spas in Europe. And to identify the radon spas first and foremost, what we used, well, specific keywords such as radon, spa, tourism, health, etc. And we used various sources to get and identify potential spas that are visited, can be visited in Europe. We used Google, we used TripAdvisor, and also the European Association of Radon Spas, Eurodon. We focus particularly on those websites which have an English or a German version, because that's, well, the languages that we as researchers were able to analyze. And we did this now about, well, 3-4 years ago. In our analysis, we then focus particularly on specific framing devices, and I will not go into detail what this means, but we looked for certain metaphors, images, adjectives, analogies, catchphrases that are used to kind of emphasize what radon is in line with what the radon spas actually try to communicate them to the people visiting their websites. We did this with a team of coders also to make sure that this was kind of a shared understanding that we had among the researchers, and it was not just an individual subjective interpretation that was being provided. In total, and here you see the list of websites that we analyzed in terms of numbering per country. We identified, I think, 25 or 26 individual radon spa websites that we analyzed. Turning then to the outcomes of this analysis, well, what we saw is that on all of the websites that we analyzed, radon is first and foremost framed as a source of health. So something which actually has health benefits. If you have certain medical conditions, if you have certain illnesses, it's something that you want to expose yourselves to. That's a framing that is very dominant on the website of these radon spas. And it's also visually supported by imagery of, well, medical context. People sitting in seemingly what are doctors' cabinets or talking with people in doctor's coats or nursing clothes, etc. A second frame that we found on almost all of the websites was presenting radon very much as a natural gas, which of course, well, it obviously is. It is a natural gas. But here we see that a lot of emphasis was put on the connection between radon and its natural origins and characteristics. And we know actually from previous research that whether you present radon as a natural gas or you present it as an indoor air pollutant has quite different effects on people and the risk perceptions that they have of the radon gas that you talk about. So if you present it as natural radon gas, people tend to have less risk perceptions connected to radon. And we see this very dominantly framed as a natural gas on the websites of the radon spas. Thirdly, we see that radon is being presented as a non-risk. So here the idea is that actually on quite some websites you see that implicit references are made to potential risk if visiting these spas by stating, for example, that pregnant women can't visit these spas, or by stating that people who recently had cancer treatments can't visit these spas. There's not very much explicit reference to what then the risk would entail of exposing yourself to radon. Actually, on only one website we found a reference to lung cancer. So it's more implicit. And what is particularly noteworthy here is that in many cases, there's also then an emphasis put on reassurance by stating that, but if you do visit us, we can provide this in a safe environment. We provide a lot of measurements, we provide a lot of medical follow-up, etc. Fourthly, we found that radon is being presented as what we termed an affordable luxury. So here the idea was that, well, by going to these spas, you're actually exposing yourself to something which is rare, which is exclusive to these spas. It's actually presented as some kind of you could call it a unique selling proposition of these spas. And then fifthly, we see that radon is being framed on quite some websites of the radon spas, but not all, as what we term the source of youth. So kind of taking this source of health a step further and stating, well, actually by going and visiting us in our spas and exposing yourself to radon, you're rejuvenating your body, you're revitalizing yourself, you're regenerating your cells, etc. So these were the 5 dominant frames that we encountered on the websites of the radon spas. We were then, of course, interested in, well, how are different stakeholder groups making sense of radon and radon spas? And we started by looking at professional stakeholder groups. So here we looked at spa employees, people managing, owning, working in these spas, both in Austria and in Germany. We conducted 11 interviews with this stakeholder group to kind of see, well, how are they making sense of radon and radon spas? How are they perceiving them in their day-to-day workings? And then we also conducted interviews with radon authorities and experts, radiation protection experts, people working in academia, also in Germany and Austria, to kind of get a similar image of how are they actually then perceiving and making sense of radon and radon spas. With this stakeholder group, we conducted 5 semi-structured interviews. Most data gathering with the first stakeholder groups with the spa employees was done in summer 2023. The radon authorities and experts there, we also conducted some of the interviews last summer in 2024. Turning then to the results there in terms of, well, how are these stakeholder groups perceiving first and foremost radon? Well, when you look at the first stakeholder group, the spa employees and the managers, what was noteworthy there is that as soon as we started raising radon and asking them, well, what do you know about radon, or how do you explain radon to someone who is not that familiar with radon, very often people stated to us, yeah, but actually I don't know that much about radon, or I only know about radon to the extent that I need it in my work. So there was a lot of self-proclaimed limited knowledge about radon, which does not mean that people did not know about radon at all, but they tried to kind of maybe, well, they were maybe a bit intrigued or a bit hesitant to talk a lot about radon with someone who they deemed might know also about radon. So they kind of try to minimize their own knowledge, although they did have knowledge about it. And what we then see in terms of perceptions is that, well, all of these stakeholders, they do perceive radon first and foremost as something which has health benefits. So they put a lot of emphasis on the fact that if you have certain medical conditions, for example, if you have certain inflammation, certain pain complaints, radon exposure might be actually good for you. Also menstrual problems, skincare problems, nasal polyps, regeneration of cells, stimulating cell metabolism were mentioned as cases in which you could actually benefit from exposure to radon. A justification for perceiving radon first and foremost in terms of its health benefits was found in 3 justification systems. First of all, it was found in experience, kind of highlighting how through their experience with patients or people visiting the spas, they knew that it had good effects. They also sometimes had even personal stories of how their relatives or they themselves even had experienced positive effects of radon exposure. They refer to history, stating that even before the spas were operating as spas, people knew that exposing yourself to what was in the water or what was in the air could have positive health benefits. People referred, for example, to mining activities in the region and how miners seem to have not certain diseases that you would expect with mining. Again, we are not making any kind of claims on whether or not these kind of, or whether there's any kind of truth in these justifications. And then thirdly, people turn to science as a potential justification for perceiving these health benefits. Although there was dispute among the spa employees. So some spa employees, they stated that they knew about scientific work, they knew about articles, which did prove, in their opinion, scientifically, that there is clear health benefits connected to exposure to radon for some diseases or some conditions, while others stated that actually they did not know that such scientific proof existed, and actually they were looking for that kind of proof. So there was a bit of a disputed character there. In terms of radon risk, there were mixed positions among the people working in these spas or operating these spas. So some did recognize that there could indeed be risks connected to radon, although they reassured that this was not the case in their spa, but more if people would expose themselves to large dose or large concentrations of radon in their workplace or in their home. While others actually were very skeptical when we raised this idea that there could also be health, threats or health risks connected to radon, kind of being surprised that this would be the case, or being skeptical that this could be the case. When we then look at radon authorities and experts and how they look at radon, of course, there the emphasis is first and foremost on the risks connected to radon and the potential detrimental health effects that exposure could have. Some of the radon experts that we talked to, they did consider that there could be potential health benefits, although they were more skeptical towards this, but highlighting that maybe in specific contexts, for example, for particularly older patients who might have certain complaints, there would at least not be necessarily any harm in exposing yourself to radon, because due to the age and due to the fact that it takes quite some time to develop cancer, maybe these people would be less at a risk. Looking then at how these
Robert, can I just stop you for a bit? I realize there are some problems with the sharing of slides. I think this is a WebEx issue, so I would recommend, if you do not see the slides and you're using a browser, please just try a different browser, and I think it should work. I apologize in advance, but I think this does not affect so many of us, so Robert, you can.
Also a lot of background noise. I don't know whether it's
yes. Please mute your microphone. Okay, great. Robert, okay. Sorry, continue.
Great. No problem. But hopefully everyone can see the slides. And otherwise, I think we will probably also share them afterwards. I don't know where.
Yes. I will share the slides later on. Actually, okay, let me just do it now so you can also see it. Yeah, great. Yeah.
So then turning to how radon spas are actually perceived by these two different professional stakeholder groups, we see that the spa employees consider their spas to be first and foremost spaces of treatment rather than only leisure. Sometimes they did make references to how their spa is indeed kind of this luxurious space in which people can really indulge themselves and get stress-free, etc. But they kind of see it as a bit of an extra on top of the kind of medical procedures that they consider to be providing in their spas. And they very much emphasize the controllability of the risk within the radon spa. So they refer to the medical checkups and follow-up that are being provided within their spas, the limiting of the time that people can spend in the spa, limiting the entrance to specific groups, so no pregnant women, no children, no people who went to recent cancer treatments, etc., and that they're continuously measuring radon and radon concentrations within their spa. So there's a lot of emphasis on we are very much controlling the potential radon risk within their spa if they actually recognize that there is a risk. Here, very often in almost all of the interviews that we conducted, which just came into the focus, people use this quite famous quote of Paracelsus of the dose making the poisoning. So kind of stating, well, depending on the dose that you're exposing yourself to, any kind of medication can actually become a poison to you, stating that, well, maybe for some people it might be better to expose themselves to a limited amount of radon rather than exposing themselves to heavy amounts of painkillers that they need to take on a daily basis, because that might be actually more detrimental. So these kind of reference and analogies were very often made in the interviews. Also, actually, with some of the authorities and experts who also mentioned this kind of reasoning and stating that, well, maybe for some conditions or for some stakeholder groups, it could be of benefit to actually go to a radon spa. Most of the authorities and experts did consider radon spas first and foremost in terms of a potential risk for the workers and the employees, people who work there on a daily basis and who are exposing themselves potentially to higher dosages than people who come and visit there as clients for shorter periods of time. As I said, some considered that there could be potential benefit for some specific conditions or demographics. And what was actually most interesting for us is that some of the authorities and experts that we talked to did share with us experiences in which they had actually noticed that the fact that radon spas are operating in certain areas makes it sometimes harder for them to communicate about radon and radon risks in these areas, because people are familiar with the ways in which radon is being framed by these spas as something that actually is good for your health, make it harder to convince people to take action if they encounter radon in their homes or in their workplaces. Now with this, I want to give the word now to Clara to present more on how the general public then is perceiving radon and radon spas.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Thanks for starting the presentation today. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So let's dive into the last topic of our task, and this is about the general public. So how is radon in the spas perceived by the general public? Next slide, please. So the aim here was to investigate what does the general public think and know about radon spas, and how do they perceive radon in these contexts? Next one, please. So therefore, to answer these questions, we used data from the Radon Spa Survey, which is part of the Radon on European Radon Behavioral Atlas. So data was collected with computer-assisted web interviews between May 2023 and March 2024. And as you can see, indicated on the map of Europe on the left side here, there are many countries where the Radon on European Radon Behavioral Atlas was carried out, and as well in Austria, Germany, and the Czech Republic. But additionally to this harmonized questionnaire that was used for this atlas, in addition, we added a few more questions about radon spas in caves. This is what you can see here in red letters. So we added 9 additional questions about the attitude towards radon spas, and then 1 more question about the risk perceptions of radon spas, and 1 more about competence in authorities to protect the visitors from potential risks of radon. So this survey was done in Austria, Germany, and the Czech Republic. Next slide, please. But now we want to start with a more general question on radon knowledge. So here the question was, do you know anything about radon? And what we found out here is that the share of respondents that either stated that they do know what radon is, or that already have heard about radon, is in Austria and in Germany around 60%. In Czech Republic, however, it's a little more, so we are more than 80% in Czech Republic. We have to mention here that for Czech Republic, the respondents of our survey, they were also involved in a radon measurement campaign. So those share of respondents that stated that they do know what radon is, they were afterwards asked, okay, please describe in your own words. And mostly we found things like, yeah, radon can cause cancer, or radon is dangerous. And we were interested to check on the radon knowledge afterwards. So those respondents that stated that they have heard of radon before and they know what radon is, they were asked selected items. This is what you can see on the left side. This is an example for Austria, and those items should test their knowledge on radon. And what we found is that basically they have a relatively low overall knowledge about radon. I know it's really, really small, but you can see for the answers that there is a lot of yellow and a lot of gray, which actually means incorrect answers, or that they would not know the answer, so they actually admit that they did not know the answer, or that they are unfamiliar with radon in general. So we can take a closer look on the third example, which is radon causes headaches. And in Austria, you can see that only 15% gave the correct answer, more than 30% gave the incorrect answer, and more than 50% actually admitted not knowing the answer or that they are unfamiliar with radon. So we have to keep in mind that the overall knowledge about radon is relatively low. But let's continue now with the radon spark questions. Thank you. So these are the first two items that were asked about the radon spars. On the left side, we see the first item, that is radon taken at specific doses relieves symptoms of some diseases. This is what you can see on the left side, and in the bar chart on the first line, we see the German results. In the second line, we see the Czech Republic results. In the third line, we see the Austrian results, and in the fourth line, we can see all of our results combined. And in gray, we have again half of respondents. So we see almost 50% of the respondents, they were unable to express a clear opinion. So they answered either they took no answer or I don't know. So it's notable that nearly half of respondents actually was unable to express a clear opinion. But the other half of people, so out of those who were able to express an opinion, we found that even 30% agreed or even strongly agreed. So out of those who have an opinion, we have more people that agree or strongly agree with this opinion. And basically the same, or it's a similar picture when we take a look at the second item, which is on the right side. So the item is that radon has healing powers, and we have a similar picture here. So a great number believe in the healing properties of radon compared to those who don't. So interesting here is that the frames that were identified on the internet pages of the radon spars, what Robert told us before, they are somehow reflected in public opinion. So basically, we could say that people are actually in line with those statements. Next slide, please. But if we take a look at the next item, so for other items, this is maybe less the case. Item number 4 is radon slows down the aging process. So we again see a high share of respondents, more than 50%, that did not answer here. And we have around 30% that disagrees or even strongly disagrees. So we have a lot of orange and dark yellow answers here. Radon slows down the aging process. This statement or this item actually reflects another frame which was found in the SPA websites. But here we could see that this frame is actually not reflected in public opinion. Thank you. Next one, please. Now we want to continue with the public awareness of radon spars and caves. So we dive into if they would know the radon spars. Item number 5 is, do you know anything about radon spars or caves? And respondents in Austria, in Germany, and in Czech Republic were asked about the awareness, and overall we see on the graph here that they are relatively known in all of our countries. So with 67% indicated that they either know radon spars or at least have heard about them before. So this is quite a high share. Awareness is even higher in Austria. So to conclude, the majority of respondents in Austria, in Czech Republic, and in Germany are aware of radon spars and caves. Next slide, please. Here, actually, we take a step back. So this was one of our first questions about radon awareness. So there we asked all of our respondents if they know what radon is or if they already have heard about radon. And then we have the share of respondents in Austria and Germany around 60%, Czech Republic even more. They stated that they already have heard about radon, right? And now we asked the same amount, so the same number of respondents, all of our respondents, if they have heard of radon spars or if they would know what radon spars are. And here it's really interesting to see that, especially for Austria, there are even more respondents answered that they know what radon spars are or have heard about radon spars. And it's not just a little bit more, it's 25% more. So this is quite an interesting finding for Austria. For Germany and for Czech Republic, we see the share is a little bit lower compared to those who have already heard about radon in general. So when we asked them about radon spars or if they have heard of radon spars before, we also asked them if they could describe in their own words, just shortly in their own words, what they know about radon spars or what they have heard before. And we found answers like, yeah, it's about treatment in the radon spars, and radon has healing properties. And in general, there is a lot of positive perception on radon and radon spars. Before we come to the next question on risk perception of spars, here we wanted to show that we used a filter. So only those people who stated that they are aware of radon spars or have heard of them, they were then they did then continue to the question about risk perception. This is important to know because there is the number of respondents is really small, at least for Germany. In the next slide. I think we can continue. Thank you, Robert. So let's take a look at risk perception of radon spars. Here, our item we wanted to check was how do you perceive the potential risk to your own health in the next 20 years from each of the following sources. So we did not only ask about risk perception in radon spars or the radon risk perceptions, but we wanted to get a more comprehensive understanding of risk perception, and so we put it in context to a list of other radiological and also non-radiological risks and hazards. So we see this list of items, and on the left side we see the results for Germany. On the right side we see the graph for Austria, the bar chart. I can mention here that there is no graph for Czech Republic, as there were too little respondents actually that gave answer to these questions. But next to risk perception, we also wanted to see, Robert also mentioned it before, if there would be a difference depending on the framing of radon. And therefore we used two different framings within this question. And the one was, so A was indoor air pollution due to radon. And the second framing of radon was natural radioactive gas radon indoors. So let's take a look at the results now. On the left graph, so the results for Germany. On top, it's again really small, but on top you can see those risks that are perceived as more risky compared to the other ones. So those which are colored with a lot of orange and a lot of dark yellow, they are perceived as more risky compared to the other ones, right? So on bottom we see a lot more green, and turquoise, they are perceived as less risky compared to the other ones. So when we start with radon risk perception, those I tried to write a little bit bigger that you can find them. For Germany on the left side, what we do see is the radon risk perception is actually rather low compared to other radiological or non-radiologic hazards, such as radioactive waste or environmental pollution. But what we found here, we have to mention again, this is a personal perception of risk, so this could be different in another setting, but the radon risk perception could also be depending on the framing of radon. This is what we found here, that radon is perceived as less risky when it is framed in terms of its natural origin. This is what we have heard in one of the frames before. And finalizing with the risk perception in radon spars, this is in the bottom line with both bar charts, yes. This is not really a surprising result when we think of, okay, it's actually your personal choice if you decide you want to go to the radon spar. So about the personal risk perception, we found here that they are perceived as least potential risk to their own health within the next 20 years. I think we can continue. Next slide, please. And coming now to our last finding here, we took a look at of different radon stakeholders. So therefore you can see two scatter plots. Again, we have the German one on the left side and the Austrian one on the right side. And this was not part of the Czech survey. So what do we see here? The scatter plot shows how well different radon stakeholders are known, and this is indicated by the dots. So the bigger the point or the dots, the better they are known by the respondents. right? And we also see here on the x-axis how if they are perceived as technically competent, and on the y-axis if they are perceived as telling the truth about radon risk. So what can we see within the results here? For Germany and Austria, it was obvious that scientists from research institutes are the most trusted stakeholders, excelling in both actually truthfulness and their technical competence. Then we also found here that the doctors, this is circled in blue or dark blue, doctors and public health authorities, they are well known by all of our respondents, but they are perceived as least competent in managing radon risks. And I tried to circle the spa management in dark yellow or brownish kind of. But for Germany, here we see with 0.2% that they are hardly known by the respondents. So it's not so easy to make a meaningful saying here, but we see they are somewhere situated in the middle. So they are perceived as technically competent. They are perceived more technically competent compared to public health authorities or doctors. And about telling the truth, they are perceived as telling more the truth compared to construction companies, for example. And in Austria, maybe they are better known. We have here almost 90%, so they are better known by the respondents, and they are also situated in the middle regarding their competence and regarding their ability to tell the truth. So last but not least, Radon Competence Center is recognized actually as the most competent stakeholder and perceived as one of the most truthful. So I think this is good news for us in the end, and I think I can give the floor back to Ove again for the conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. So indeed, coming to the conclusions, well, what we have seen in our research, also looking at the framing, but also the enactments provided by the different professional stakeholder groups, is that there is the enactment of different radon realities. One reality in which we need to protect ourselves from radon because it's a risk to our health. It's something that we need to take action on. But another radon reality in which radon is actually something which is beneficial to your health, something that you can expose yourself to in terms of certain medical conditions, certain treatments, a luxury, etc. And this can pose some challenges for radon risk communication, particularly in those cases in which there's a potential conflation of radon realities. For example, in areas in which well, there is a lot of communication about radon, or in which radon spas are actually situated. So for that reason, we also, one of the radon milestones, provided a range of recommendations on how to deal with this potential conflation of these two different radon realities. And I think one of the most important recommendations that we make here is that in radon communication, we should actually recognize the existence of these two radon realities. So health authorities, for example, should also well, be aware and maybe also communicate about the fact that there are facilities which are offering these kind of treatments with radon, but also, and maybe even more importantly, because it is not that much happening now, radon spas and these kind of health facilities need to also communicate more about the risks that radon might pose to you in your house or in your workplace. So that's one important issue here in terms of harmonizing communication in those instances in which these radon realities conflate. There is also a deliverable written on all of the work that was conducted in this subtask of the radon norm project that is currently submitted to the European Commission, and we have an article in draft that we also hope to submit soon. Of course, as we announced at the beginning of this seminar, this was kind of first of a kind exploratory research, which also means that there's of course opportunities for future research left. First of all, well, it would be, I think, very interesting to also shift the focus to the clients, to the people actually visiting these spas, to get a better understanding of why they visit these spas, what their impressions are of these spas, and what they do to them in terms of their understanding of radon. For different practical reasons, we were not able to include these stakeholder groups in the research now, but it would definitely be interesting to shift attention there as well. And of course, also to include other country contexts. We have particularly focused here or zoomed in, well, mostly on Germany and Austria, you could say. They were present in all of the data gathering. But as we've shown in the map on one of the first slides, well, you find these kind of spas maybe in less numbers, but still in different European countries or other European countries as well. So with this, I want to end our part of this research seminar or the presentation. Maybe just one more thing that I was asked to showcase here is that actually in light of other radon work packages, there is a training course being organized in April 2025 in Munich on radon therapy, focusing on theory, practice, benefits, and health risks. So anyone who likes to know more about this team, particularly also more from a more technical perspective, I think, you're very much invited to send their application to Andrei Wojcik, so a letter of application, CV, and supporting letter before Valentine's Day 2025. That's the submission deadline to participate in this course. And well, I think now the floor is open to any comments, questions that there might be.